At 3:42 in the morning on August 23rd, 70 armed boats emerged from the darkness like a pack of wolves, charging straight at the USNS Liberty Star, a lone American supply ship carrying fuel and ammunition in the Red Sea. What happened next wasn't just a battle, it was a brutal lesson that proved why you never underestimate American sailors, even when they're outnumbered 70-1. But here's what the Pentagon didn't want you to know about this attack, and why it changes everything about naval warfare. Now, before we dive into the minute-by-minute combat, I need you to understand something crucial. The Liberty Star wasn't a destroyer bristling with weapons. She wasn't a cruiser with advanced missile systems. This was a supply ship, what we call a logistics vessel, crewed largely by civilian mariners and a small Navy security detachment. These are the unsung heroes who keep our carrier strike groups operational thousands of miles from home. They carry the fuel, the food, the ammunition that keeps our naval power alive. And on this night, they found themselves in a fight for their lives. This wasn't a random pirate attack. Intelligence recovered from the scene proves this was something far more sinister. Picture this. You're on the bridge of the Liberty Star, and suddenly your radar screen lights up like a Christmas tree. But these aren't friendly contacts. 70 high-speed boats, no lights, no radio identification, moving in coordinated formation toward your position. The watch officer's voice cuts through the night. This isn't interference. It's an organized approach. In that moment, every man aboard knew their routine supply run had just turned into something none of them had trained for. Now, how many of you served on logistics ships? Drop a comment because you know the feeling I'm talking about. That moment when you realize you're not just carrying supplies anymore. You're carrying the weight of defending American interests on the high seas. The general quarters alarm shrieked through the ship. Civilian engineers, medical personnel, cooks, men who signed up to serve but never expected to fight, suddenly found themselves manning .50 caliber machine guns, their hands shaking as they loaded ammunition belts. At 4:45 a.m., the firing order finally came through. And when that first .50 caliber opened up, red tracer rounds streaking across the dark water, the night exploded into hell. The lead boat erupted in flames, the bow splintering, debris flying. But the other 69 didn't stop. They kept coming like a swarm of angry hornets, some loaded with RPGs, others with crude machine gun mounts, and some, and this is what chills my blood, packed with fuel barrels for suicide runs. Remember I mentioned evidence this wasn't random piracy? Well, here's your first. These boats split into 3 attack groups, executing pincer movements that would make a Naval Academy instructor proud. The ship's CIWS system, that's the close-in weapon system, swiveled and locked onto targets. When that 20mm Vulcan cannon opened up, it sounded like the world's angriest chainsaw. One boat packed with fuel barrels took a direct hit. The explosion created a fireball taller than the ship's mast. But here's what gets me every time I think about this story. A 19-year-old cook from Kansas found himself in hand-to-hand combat when boarders made it onto the deck. This kid, who probably never threw a punch in anger, was swinging a fire extinguisher at armed attackers to defend his shipmates. Let me paint you the real picture of what combat looks like on a supply ship. This isn't Hollywood. There's no dramatic music, no heroic one-liners. It's chaos, pure and simple. Smoke choking your lungs, brass casings rolling under your feet, the smell of cordite and burning diesel fuel. Men you've shared meals with for months bleeding on the deck beside you. A civilian engineer with a chest wound being dragged to safety by his buddies while bullets whistled overhead. One sailor took a round to the shoulder, but kept feeding ammunition to the gun crew. When asked later why he didn't go below for medical attention, you know what he said? "These are my shipmates. You don't abandon family." That's the spirit I want you to remember when people ask whether our military is still strong, when people question whether this generation has what it takes. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen that kind of brotherhood in action? For 40 minutes, the Liberty Star fought alone. 40 minutes of continuous combat against overwhelming odds. But then the radar picked up a signal that changed everything. The USS Mason, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, was charging through the night like the cavalry. When Mason arrived, those 5-inch guns didn't just speak, they roared. High explosive rounds screaming across the water, creating white-hot explosions that flipped boats like toys. The psychological effect was immediate. Some attackers tried to flee. But here's where this story takes a dark turn, and why Pentagon officials are still analyzing what happened. When Mason's crew boarded one of the intact boats, they found something that sent chills through the intelligence community. Encrypted radios, NATO maps marked with warship positions, military-grade communications equipment. This wasn't some ragtag bunch of Somali pirates looking for ransom money. This was a professionally planned operation designed to test American naval responses. Think about what this means, gentlemen. Someone, and we can speculate who, used the cover of piracy to conduct a full-scale naval warfare rehearsal. They wanted to see how quickly we could respond, what our defensive capabilities were, how our logistics ships would react under pressure. The Liberty Star wasn't just defending herself, she was defending the principle that American vessels, flying American flags, carrying supplies to protect American interests, will not be intimidated on the high seas. And here's what every American should understand. Our supply ships are the lifeline of our naval power. Without them, our carrier strike groups become floating museums. Without them, we can't project power globally, attack our logistics, and you're attacking the foundation of American maritime dominance. The aftermath tells us everything we need to know about the changing nature of warfare. The line between military and civilian targets has disappeared. Every American vessel, from the mightiest carrier to the humblest supply ship, is now a potential frontline combatant. But here's what our enemies learned that night. American sailors, whether they're career Navy or civilian mariners, will stand and fight. They'll improvise, adapt, and overcome. A cook becomes a gunner, an engineer becomes a boarding party repeller, a supply ship becomes a fortress. What questions does this raise for you about our naval readiness? About the threats we're facing? Because I guarantee you this attack was just the beginning. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. The men of the Liberty Star went to sea to deliver supplies. They came home having delivered something far more important, a message that America doesn't back down, doesn't surrender, and will meet force with overwhelming force. If this story moved you, if it made you proud of our sailors, share it with every veteran, every American who needs to understand what our people in uniform face every day, because these stories need to be told. Next week, I'm going to show you the classified after-action report from this engagement. What worked, what didn't, and how the Navy is changing its procedures for protecting logistics vessels. Because if you think the Liberty Star was the only supply ship that might face this kind of threat, you're in for a wake-up call. Until then, remember this. Freedom of navigation isn't free. It's paid for by sailors who stand watch in dangerous waters, far from home, defending the sea lanes that keep America strong. Fair winds and following seas. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, because these are the stories that matter.